Good evening, and welcome to this third installment in our series of Nature City Conversations. Tonight, we are coming to you with a complete local guide to gardening with native plants. Tanse, Candice Savage Nitsikatson, Misaskatuminik Ochenia. My name is Candice Savage, and I have the honor of being the chair of Wild About Saskatoon, which is sponsoring this conversation, and your host tonight. I am speaking to you from Treaty 6 territory here in Saskatoon and the homeland of the Métis Nation. It's our hope and intention through Wild About Saskatoon to come to understand more deeply the Cree teaching of Wakotowin, living in relationship with all beings. So to do that tonight, we're going to the garden, and we've assembled a panel of 3 people who are madly in love with the plants that naturally flourish here on the Northern Plains. 3 people who are also experts on growing these plants in their gardens. So we're going to begin with a formal Q&A moderated by me, and then move on to answering your questions. We really want to hear from you. So all you have to do is enter your questions or comments in the chat, and we will get to them shortly. So there's no stupid questions. If you're a beginner, we want beginner questions. If you've been gardening with these plants for a while and you have wisdom to impart, we would love to hear that too. So to introduce tonight's guests. Rennie Grills, some of you may know as the Resource Management Officer with the Meewasin Valley Authority, but he's here tonight to represent the family business, Blazing Star Wildflower Seed Company. Blazing Star was started by Rennie's parents back in the early 1990s as a farm diversification project. In the early 2000s, Rennie's mother, Mary, passed the business on to Rennie's wife, Lisa. And Lisa has expanded the business to include custom seed packages, wildflower plants, and heirloom tomatoes. Blazing Star is now a 3-generation business with Lisa and Rennie's teenage children, Salix, Jonathan, and Linnea, helping out. Rennie has a degree in plant ecology from the University of Saskatchewan and is involved with many groups, including the Society for Range Management, South Saskatchewan River Watershed Stewards, and the Saskatchewan Invasive Species Council, to name a few. Our next speaker is Chet Neufeld. Chet is the Executive Director of the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan, founder of the Saskatchewan Invasive Species Council, and a co-founder of the Canadian Council on Invasive Species. He's also a very key member and founder of Wild About Saskatoon. He has worked for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and as an environmental consultant. His work has included projects dealing with education and outreach, habitat restoration, native plant research, and invasive species management. He specializes in plant ecology and is also a professional agrologist with the Saskatchewan Institute of Agrologists. I happen to know that he gardens with his wife, Candice, who is also a botanist, and with their son, Nate. And it seems to me his favorite grass is blue grama. Doesn't everyone have a favorite grass? Our third speaker is Sandra Walker. Sandra is an ethnobotanist and educator in Saskatchewan who has taught numerous workshops and worked for major nature centers and school systems and at Wanuskewin. And she also is a very valued member of Wild About Saskatoon. She is a nature columnist and the author of several publications and educational plans for the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan and the Saskatchewan Archaeology Society. And she is the author of this book, The Path to Wild Food, which was published by Lone Pine. She encourages fellow enthusiasts to foster a respect for nature, and her goal is to help us all understand that there are ways to feed and support ourselves beyond the supermarket. So you can see, we're really, really lucky to have all these people with us tonight to answer our questions. So my first question to all of you is a dangerous one, because here you are, plant and garden enthusiasts, and I'm almost afraid to get you started on this. But I thought that by way of introducing yourselves further, it would be lovely to hear briefly from each of you about your own gardens. Where do you live? Are you in the city, outside of the city? If we were able to come for a visit, what would we see? Who wants to be first? Rennie, you're there first on my screen. Why don't you handle that?
Okay, well, thanks, Candace. And it's thank you for inviting us this evening. And it's great to be at the table with Sandra and Chet as well tonight, because I look forward to speaking with them and sharing their thoughts as well. So my wife Lisa and I, we live in Aberdeen, so we're just northeast of Saskatoon. So we're in a small farming community, and we've been here since 2009. So our front yard, when we first moved here, was typical lawn grass with 3 big pine trees, and long grass, mainly quackgrass and Kentucky bluegrass. And we slowly started converting it to native grass species, native wildflower species, also knowing that we're also in a community that, people are not necessarily into landscaping extravagantly with their front yards. And so we slowly took out a spot in our front yard and converted into different wildflower species. And then we just keep expanding and slowly expanding. Most of our front yard is wildflowers from prairie crocus, the 3-flowered avens, which just started flowering earlier this week. And then we move into western red lilies in end of June, and we have black-eyed Susans, Gaillardia, and then in the fall we get the goldenrods and the bergamot hyssops. And so, we have a wide range of colors and heights that occur in our front yard. My favorite, of course, is the wild blue flax. And the reason I like that one is because it flowers in the morning. So when I go to work in the morning, I have these beautiful little blue flowers right where I park my work truck or my truck. And then when I get back home at the end of the day, those petals fall off, and then you can see the rest of the flowers. But we also do have some non-native species in that mix as well. We have a big rhubarb plant as well. So, and we use that because we like eating rhubarb crisp. So, and then in our backyard, it's a little bit of a mix of everything. We do got some native plants back there. We got some fruit trees like a Saskatoon, but we also have a sour cherry. But then also we have a lot of wildflower plants that we're growing for production back there too. So it's a mix of everything. So,
Chet, how does your garden grow?
Fairly well right now, actually. And thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. I know it's a nice night. When my wife and I bought our house on the east side of Saskatoon about 15 years ago, it was a more or less a new house and came with just a bare lot, not even topsoil. That was all scraped away, so we had to replace some topsoil. Being a new area, it's full sun. There wasn't a speck of shade. We had a blank slate / a ton of work to do, but we could do what we wanted, and we were kid free and had a lot of time on our hands at the time, and so we did it all at once, which I don't recommend, but we did it. So our front yard has a few different elements to it. We do have a grassy, quote unquote, lawn area that is actually all native grass, blue grama and June grass, and short growing things that look more or less like a normal grass, but you don't have to mow it. Then closer to the sidewalk, we've got a wildflower bed that kind of curves around and follows the lines of the house. And separating the two we've got a dry creek bed. It's all filled with cobble, but we did tie in our downspouts to that creek bed so that when it does rain, all of the water coming off the roof makes that creek run. So it does fill up with water, and we do have a few more moisture-loving plants along that creek bed. And in the backyard, we've got traditional vegetable garden, and we've got a garden shed taking up some space. The native grass lawn in the back, and like Rennie, we didn't want to stand out in a bad way and be so different from our neighbors. But in our backyard where nobody can see, we let things get a little more wild. And so we've got wildflowers interspersed among the grasses. So we have more of a meadow look. We have some raised beds. And then we have a bog garden as well. So we have a rain barrel. And then when that overflows, it drains into this area. And being on the east side of Saskatoon, it's all very heavy clay. So we've got a natural clay liner to that area, and it keeps it a little more moist. And so we've got things like wild irises and marsh marigolds and all of these kind of wetland plants growing in this area. And then in the kind of awkward space between ours and our neighbors, basically the only place you do get shade, we have a forest understory that we have recreated. So we've got things like wild Columbine, and that's actually coming up right now. Solomon's seal is almost blooming right now. Tall lungwort is almost blooming. The violets, the various species of violets are blooming right now in that area. It's actually my favorite little spot in the whole yard. We've got a little bit of a stone walking path that goes through it. So that's my yard in a nutshell.
It sounds like quite the estate. Is this a large lot?
It is not a large lot. It is a very small city lot. We don't have much of a yard at all. I think mine would be about an average size for a new yard. If your house is probably 20 years or older, I'm certain that you have a larger lot than ours. We just managed to pack a lot in. I think we have over 100 native species, but you definitely don't have to go that big. We just managed to get that because we've got so many different little microsites or little habitats. We've got the bog garden, which is always soggy. We've got the dry creek bed, which is sometimes wet. And then we've got these other areas which are varying degrees of dryness.
So Sandra, what about you? You have a different take on gardening with these native plants, right?
I guess in many respects, I like the flowers as well. And thanks for having me as well. And nice to join everyone this evening. So yes, I have to admit, when we were looking for a house, we told our realtor to give us a lot and a half or a double lot. And so I have a double lot in an old neighborhood. So my front yard's totally shady. And so in the front, it's more or less my herb garden and things that you would find in the woods in Saskatchewan. So I have high bush cranberry, I have choke cherries out front. I have a couple of other cherries that are cultivars, of course, too. Carmine jewels, Evans cherries. I also have a half scass out there. I have a couple of blueberries. And then I have a bunch of asparagus, which is one of my favorites. So when everything flowers out in there, it kind of looks nice with the asparagus. So it's a blend of food and plants for pollination and those kind of things that the birds like. I feed the birds, and so when the sunflowers pop up, they can just keep growing there, no problem. And then I have a lot of milkweed out front too, which is one of the things, again, that you can eat. And so then when you come to my backyard, I have a pond right away, and again, another cherry tree. And in my pond, I have cattails, arrowheads, a lot of native plants that you can actually, again, eat. And my dog has been enjoying them this spring, and I have to start from scratch again. I didn't know he was a forager too. So then it goes into some Saskatoon bushes, and underneath that, again, that's a bit of a shady area. So I have Solomon seal, hyssop, bergamot, and let's see what else is growing in there. Jerusalem artichokes, and again, so a food source that you can eat the tubers on. And then it goes in, I do have a vegetable garden at the very back, which is rather large. And then I have another native section where I imported a bunch of sand on purpose so that I could get the top prairie plants, vegetables growing. My wild onions are doing awesome. I have Indian breadroot growing in there. I have prickly pear cactus in there. Let's see what else is in there. And then, of course, a variety of just crocuses and stuff in there as well. But since it's been doing well, I've been collecting the seeds and taking them out to my favorite places out in nature and making sure that they get back out there and keep growing, because as a forager, you got to maintain that. So that's why it's partly in my yard. I don't have to go as far, but I can also take it back.
So it's really important, the perspective that you bring to these gardens, because of course these plants have sustained people for generations beyond counting.
Yeah.
And Saskatoons are as important a staple and chokecherries as bison, really. So we can't bring bison back to our yards, but we can bring these fabulous plants. So I want to ask a kind of basic question. What is a native plant? What's so special about them? If we go to the seed shop and we see an envelope, it says native wildflowers. Is that what we're talking about? Why is it beyond being able to eat them and having this connection with the landscape around us? Why is it important to have them in gardens?
It's an ecosystem that's disappearing in Canada to start off with. And so if we can rejuvenate it, it brings back the biodiversity that's, if you can have little pockets of it, the better off we are. Lawns are expensive. Native plants, vegetables, they know how to handle this kind of environment in the first place, so I don't have to water them near as much as I do my vegetable garden. They do far better from just what's going on. And if they don't do anything that one year, they know how to hibernate. If we don't get a lot of rain and get them going, they know how to deal with that. So that's the difference between, and I don't have to reseed my garden, my native garden, ever. Ever. It does it itself.
So is there a special relationship between pollinating insects and these plants that evolved here?
For sure, yeah. It's amazing the wildlife that I do get in my backyard, and the ponds really do help bring it in. I have a lot of bird diversity. I get, I'm sure I'm on the migratory list for them to stop here, and but I also have a lot of mice too. But I've even had I have a stone wall that is my garden vegetable, and I have a chickmunk living in the stone wall. And so how many people have a chickmunk in their yard? And I have dogs.
Randy, you had something to add.
Yeah, well, I know like our yard, and we always leave our stems in the wintertime and let it, or in the fall and let the snow come in. And we usually don't clean it up until mid-May kind of thing, just as the flowers start coming on and the leaves start coming out. And this spring when we cleaned up, you wouldn't believe the number of ladybugs that we had in our front yard. Like, it was just phenomenal. And just that insect diversity that we're finding in our front yard. We'll get goldfinches coming in and picking the fluff off of the aster seeds in the fall, or we'll get, butterflies coming in, or monarch butterflies, if they do fly through the area, finding the milkweeds, right? So it's so unique looking at all those different insects coming through, and even the birds coming in, right? And like in our backyard, just the diversity in our backyard too. We got robins and song sparrows, and I got two crows outside right now fighting over the water with the robins, right? And just that diversity is so neat to see. And
why do you leave the stems, Rennie?
Yeah, the reason we leave the stems is for two reasons. One is to sort of break that landscape up a bit, to give it some color in the fall and into the winter time, because each stem has a different color, right? There's goldens, there's golden colors, there's browns, there's a bit of reds, and then also it helps trap the snow when it comes blowing through with those north winds into our yard, and then also just to create some of that habitat, because some of those insects will actually bore into those stems, and that's their wintering habitat. So if you remove them in the fall, you lose that habitat for them. So what we usually do is, when we do clean it up in the spring, we'll let the pile sit there for a week or so, let the insects move out, and then we'll compost those stems, and then we'll use it back on the site. So we'll just sort of chip them up and add them back to the site.
So the stems also are nesting habitats for most of our wild species of bees. We tend to think of bee and then we flash immediately to honeybee, right? Which is, some of us would say, an invasive species, certainly an introduced species. But we have hundreds of species of native bees, and some of them use hollow stems. So I've been really excited this spring to learn that you can just cut them off to a foot or two and just leave them and let the plants grow up around them, because I always was wondering how best to do that. But
yeah, like when we trim ours back, when I say cut it back, we're at 6-8 inches we're leaving off the ground too. So it looks rat-tatty from a typical horticultural perspective, but as soon as those plants start growing, it really adds to that structure. So yeah.
And your aesthetic starts to change, I think. To me, my messy garden now looks very pretty. So the garden centers right now are bursting with varieties. There's everything from asters to zinnias. Are you mean-spirited people saying that we shouldn't be growing all those pretty things? Chet, I know you have something to say about this.
Yes. No. No, if you have a favorite flower that isn't native, that's fine. You can do a mix. Some of the plants that I would recommend you avoid at a typical garden center would be those that have double blooms or things like that. A lot of these that have been bred to look pretty for us are absolutely useless for wildlife, particularly pollinators. Some of them have been bred to the point where they don't produce nectar anymore. So if you're a hungry bee, that's like showing up at a restaurant with the doors closed and you're starving. Or some of them have, I was mentioning the double blooms. They've got their petals so close together that it's almost impossible for the pollinators to get their way into where that nectar is. And then the other thing is, those pollinators have not evolved with those species. Those are brand new species evolutionarily to them. We bring a lot of ours from Europe, Asia, and our native pollinators have not evolved with that. So, and some of our pollinators are adapted to one or maybe two species of plants. They have that close of a relationship that if you don't have that plant, you don't have that pollinator. Monarch butterflies, the caterpillars would be a good example. The monarch butterflies can sip nectar from a number of different species, but the caterpillars absolutely need to eat the milkweed. And that's not a unique relationship. There are lots of different pollinator plant relationships like that. So, I'm not saying don't get anything from a garden center. I even have a couple in my yard that, my mom gave me, my mother-in-law gave me. They thought they were pretty. We put them in. But by and large, I'm sticking to native plants, and if you don't have a single native plant, just try one. One's a good start.
You have a resource for people, right? A wallet card?
I do. So I think that link is up in the chat. It's a Grow Me Instead wallet card. It's something that you can print off, cut out, fold up, and keep in your wallet. Pretty low tech. But it's something that if you are at a garden center and thinking about buying a plant, it's just a sober second thought to make sure that what you're buying isn't going to take over your yard. Not Unfortunately, not everything that is carried in garden centers is ecologically safe. Some of them, even though they're not on the Weed Control Act, they're still aggressive and invasive. And so this just serves as a good double check to make sure that what you're buying isn't going to be invasive. So it gives you a couple of native alternatives that you could look at if your heart is set on a specific look for a plant, as well as a non-invasive horticultural alternative. So that's a really good resource. We also provide those if you don't have a printer or something. You can just contact me, and I'm sure we're going to provide contact information at the end of this. And I can send you out as many printed wallet cards as you'd like. We just had, I think, 2,000 printed, so we're good to go.
We have in the chat, you will find the web addresses for both Blazing Star and the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan, as well as information about Sandra's book. So from there, you'll be able to find phone numbers and other information that you might want. So are you saying, Chet, that we should be growing caterpillars? Is that what gardens are for?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, grow some caterpillars. Yeah, and one of the aims that I have of my yard, and when I'm talking with people and helping them out with their yards, one of the goals that I try to incorporate is to have something blooming throughout the growing season, so that no matter when a pollinator comes to your yard, they're going to find something to eat. And it's a win-win situation, because the pollinator has a stable source of food, and you have something pretty to look at all the time.
Well,
I'd like to add to that. Milkweed makes your backyard smell absolutely gorgeous, like you're walking into a florist shop. You can eat it too. It must be cooked before it's eaten. When the pods are young and you deep fry them, which isn't good for you, but it's like cream cheese on the inside. Like it's so yes, a lot of this stuff is edible if you cook it first too. So I just thought I'd add that to it. It's not just caterpillars that can eat the milkweed.
That's true. I'm looking at the fireweed coming up in my shade garden right now, and it's right at the right height to cut it and steam it. It's about 8 inches tall, and I'm looking at it with hungry eyes. Yeah,
Makes good jelly too.
Like for ourselves, we always the bergamot and the hyssop leaves in the fall, right? You know, for making teas and stuff, and you can even use it for spicing up some of your alcoholic beverages as well. Some of these plants as well, if you sort of lean that way too. So there's a lot of different options. You could eat your plants. You could also drink them too. So.
And I was just taught that if you dry them and put them in with tobacco for making offerings, then when they're burned, they smell wonderful. So, I mean, there's a deep significance to some of these plants. I have more questions, but I am thrilled to say that our chat box is filling up with other people's questions. So we're going to go to them. And if there's any time left, I'll ask you my other very important questions later. So someone has explained to us that they're just getting started with native plants and would love to hear how to plant so that there is successive flowering. What would you recommend to have blossoms available through the season? Don't all speak at once.
Okay, I'll start. Um, so if you're starting out, I would keep it simple. Start with a small, easy to manage area. You don't want to get frustrated. You want this to be fun. So what I normally tell people is work up to that point. Right now, if you start even with just a square meter and one species, something easy to grow like coneflower or gaillardia, they bloom midsummer and they bloom for quite a long time. And they will self-seed, but not to the point where they're totally going to take over. They'll basically just replace themselves and fill in the area that they're growing in. And then once you're happy with that, maybe try adding a couple of other easy to grow species in there outside of when your prairie coneflower and gaillardia, for example, flower. So have something a little earlier, maybe something like Columbine, that flowers a little earlier, and something a little later like smooth aster or a goldenrod, something like that. And then, lengthen it out. Don't make it overwhelming because we're all very, very busy people. And just take the time and maybe over a couple of growing seasons, get it to the point where you've got season long blooming.
And then also, when you're starting out, you have to realize that majority, like 99% of these native plants are perennials too, right? So in that first year, they're producing that root system. So the above ground is, actually, I have a plug here that we started in-house. So this is a many-flowered yarrow. We started in-house under our lights in February, and you can see the root system on here, how it's developing. So it's really working really hard to get the roots growing and very little growth up top. And so in that first year, you're not going to get a flower. You're going to get a little plant. And depending on the plant, it might only be 2 or 3 centimeters tall. But it's building that root system and building that big fibrous root system to help modify the soil, make a great habitat for that plant. And then it's that second or third or fourth year is when you're going to find flowers. And so I find a lot of people sometimes get a little bit impatient because they're used to those garden centers where you go and buy something that's already flowering, you stick it in the ground, it's flowering for the rest of the season, and then, oh, great. And then they start all over again. But these perennials, once it's established, it's there for years and years and years. And so, that first year or two, you got to be very patient with it as well, because you're really building that foundation for future years. And I agree with Chet, start with something simple. And as you get more experienced, you start bringing in the other species like the milkweeds or the Western red lilies, or some of the other ones that are harder to establish, like the Indian breadroot. That was mentioned, so start out simple and then just keep expanding and adding. So one way I always look at when you're doing any garden project with native plants is that it's a long-term passion, right? It's not a short-term fix. If you want a short-term fix, that's when you go to the garden center and you buy your annual zizias. But if you're looking for that long-term passion, wildflowers or native plants is the way to go.
Okay.
I'll add in on that, and my suggestion would be choose what type of ecozone that you want. If you have a shady area, then you want plants that are going to grow from the woods that you find in the woods. And if you have you want a nice top prairie, then you need a very sandy area with a lot of sun for those to grow. That's where my Indian breadroot and stuff is. So, and I wouldn't start with Indian breadroot by any means. It took me a long time to get it. So
what grows well in the shade?
As far as edibles, the hyssop. Oh, okay. Well, Saskatoon. I have a Saskatoon bush. So underneath the understory in that, I have also Jerusalem artichoke, which is a native, more common in the south end of the province. I have Solomon seal, and you can eat the root on that, but be careful because there's another version that is poisonous. Won't kill you, but it'll make you sick. So you got to know what you're doing, and that's why I didn't put it in my book, because I wasn't going to let anyone make those mistakes. I have did I say hyssop? And then I got a bunch of native strawberries under there, and wood violets, a bunch of the different wood violets, because you can candyize those and put them on muffins and they look wonderful. So, but for my top prairie, wild onions is an easy one to grow if you can get the seeds, but it has to be a well draining area. And I have to admit, at work, that I've noticed the wild onions are aborting their flowers at this point because of the lack of rain. But mine in my yard have been pampered and got water, and so I'll be taking some seeds back out there. So again, if you're going to get into this, make sure you put it back, please.
Do you dig plants up from natural areas?
I did at Brightwater because there was construction going on. So I took advantage of the construction. Yes, and I took they had a bunch of sand that they wanted rid of, and I quickly took the sand because I knew it had a seed bank in it. And so I ended up with primrose, a white primrose, which attracts a rare moth. And it's very, very beautiful. It's a little pink moth that comes in, and I've had it in my yard.
So
Sandra's
your ethics about collecting plants and seeds, right? How do you do that?
You need permits if you're doing it. But again, I've taken advantage of the places that I work and construction going on, and take, so yeah. And then I have bought a lot of from Blazing Stars as well. So
I would say Sandra's is a special situation where she's basically salvaging it from a construction site. I don't recommend anybody dig plants from the wild. There's a number of ecological and ethical issues there. Number one, they probably won't survive because Rennie showed you the roots on a not even 1-year-old plant. Some of these roots, when they're on an established plant, go several meters deep. And so if you're just going a shovel depth down, you're getting about 1/10 of the roots, and it's likely not enough to sustain the plant after that shock. And some of them have associations with mycorrhizal fungi and all sorts of things like that, that you're not going to give them in your yard. And then you're leaving a gaping hole in the ecosystem that is probably going to get filled in with an invasive species. It's just this area that's begging to get colonized by some kind of disturbance species. So it's not the best. Plus, if you go with a native plant or seed retailer, you're getting all of that expertise and you're supporting the industry.
And then Candace, you had asked about collecting seed as well, and it's there's different ways of collecting seed, and there's also ways of being respectful to the land as well. Protected areas or conservation areas, definitely you need a permit to go in and collect, and it's not encouraged by a lot of agencies actually. Also, if you are collecting seed, only take a little bit, right? Because you want that plant to, you need to sustain that population on that site as well, right? So, if you take one little seed head, that's one thing. But if you go in there and do a large harvest of seed, you've depleted that site of future seed propagules as well, right? So, so be very sustainable and very cautious on how you approach seed harvesting as well. And yeah, we get a lot of questions about digging up plants, and exactly what Chet says. Usually in the June, we get a lot of questions about lady slippers, right? Because everyone remembers going up to the cabin July long weekend and seeing the lady slippers in the ditches, and and they'll go and maybe if you're people dig them out and then they say, oh, they flowered for 3 years and they disappeared, right? And that's because of that mycorrhizal relationship in that soil that you don't have in your yard, right? So knowing what you have, what your capabilities are too in your yard is important. So, some species will not grow because you don't have the right soils or the right mycorrhizae relationships, or you got too much shade or too much light, right? And so understanding that ecology a little bit helps as well.
We're making this all sound very hard. On the other hand, if you get seeds from Blazing Star or another supplier, if you are able to buy these plants as little well-rooted bedding plants, you put them in the ground, and my experience is most of them know how to grow really well. It's not actually that difficult. We have a lot of questions. One person would like to know, how do you keep your yard from being eaten by rabbits? One possibility is that's what fences are for.
Get a dog. I don't have the problem.
Yeah, and and it depends what you're looking at. And you may have to have some sacrifice plants, right? So if you want to protect, say, your vegetables, you put a fence around, or if there's a tree that you're worried that they're going to strip the bark, you may want to put a little fence around, and then keep some of your other plants as sort of the sacrifice, because those rabbits do need to eat as well too. You may want to shoo them off your place into the neighbors, but you may have to sort of design your yard to know that you're going to have some stuff eaten, right? So it's never a simple solution, but there is some workarounds. So
I think our neighbor is pretty happy when the jackrabbits come and eat the wild raspberries on his side of our front yard. So someone has an area in their new yard that is covered in gravel. Any advice on how to convert it into a native wildflower garden?
There's actually a number of species that do well as a rock garden. If you wanted to keep a portion of that gravel, or you could peel that gravel away and replace it with topsoil. But as far as gravel goes, I mean, so I'll tell you the story about my fire pit in my backyard. I had some pea gravel that I put around as kind of a spark buffer, probably a meter wide strip of pea gravel around. And for the first few years, it was just straight clean pea gravel. And then the early blue violets moved into it, and it's just solid early blue violets. And I wouldn't have thought that would have been a hospitable enough habitat for early blue violets, because you usually see them in moister parts of the prairies or in an aspen forest understory or something like that. But they're in probably the hottest, driest part of my yard in this pea gravel and loving life. There's probably, in a square foot of that pea gravel, there's probably a dozen early blue violets. So there are species that do well in rock gardens. There's a native sedum that we have that does very well. It's actually provincially rare, but there's a commercial source for it. There are things like early blue violet, blue-eyed grass that would do well. Some of the primroses, like the ones that Sandra was talking about, that do very well. There's a number of species that you can grow in a rock garden.
And then there's the one, depending on who the gardener is, there's the yarrow, the common yellow or the white yarrow, and it can be extremely aggressive in your yard. But we've had people buy yarrow plants in seed and use it as sort of like a microgreen in their lawn, because they have a poor lawn, and instead of adding like white Dutch clover, they've been adding yarrow instead, and they keep it mowed at a short level. And so there's some other options like that too, right? So, and I think like in that solid sand or gravel, some of those species that could be maybe a little bit more aggressive in a regular soil would do quite well in that hard gravel.
What about harebell?
Oh yeah, and harebell would do really well. I know we've collected harebell seed in pure sand where nothing else is growing but harebell, and so yeah, it would probably do quite well in that. Yeah, I've seen it growing in pure gravel too.
Such delicate little wildflowers, and you think, oh, they're so delicate and fragile. They're the toughest plants. Like they survive on almost nothing. They are so tough.
Where would you get them if you wanted some? If you wanted to grow harebells, where would you get harebells?
Rennie, do you sell them?
Yes, we do.
There you go.
Call
Rennie.
Yeah, we sell seeds and plants as well when our plants are ready. But also the Native Plant Society has a listing service as well of native seed and plant suppliers, and so it's a great resource. And there's there's not too many of us that are producers of native plants or seeds in Western Canada, and we do we do communicate amongst each other as well, and we do refer each other to different people as well, right? Because we know not everyone could produce everything, and not everyone can have things available in a certain year. So we do direct people to some of our colleagues in other provinces and other companies as well.
So we have a couple of quick questions, I think quick anyway. Would monarchs come through Saskatoon if we planted more milkweed? If you plant it, will they come?
I've had them in my yard, and they seem to come every 7 years is when you see them. I don't see them every year. And when I finally see 2 holes in my milkweed, I know they're there. And that's when I don't eat my milkweed. If they're there, it's their milkweed.
Yeah, Sandra's right. They are cyclical. And there are different species of milkweed. So Sandra, you do showy milkweed or showy milkweed?
I have showy and I have dwarf in my
Dwarf
yard.
milkweed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and both of those species have bigger oval-shaped leaves. I've got world milkweed, and it's got very thin, almost needle-like leaves. And what I have found is that it may not be the best plant for monarchs because it's a hard. I'm putting myself in the shoes of a monarch, and it's a hard leaf to land on. It's so narrow,
Right.
and even the weight of a butterfly would probably make it bend down. Whereas those oval leaves are big landing pads for a monarch to lay their eggs on. So it's a very big target to lay an egg on, and then putting myself in the shoes of the caterpillar, that's a big leaf and a lot of food for that caterpillar.
Yeah.
Whereas mine, it's hard to lay an egg on, and then it's hard. It would take probably hundreds of those small little linear leaves to fill up a caterpillar. So mine is maybe not the best plant for monarchs necessarily. So I would probably recommend some of the other ones. Mine's a great nectar plant, and it doesn't spread really at all, which is one of the reasons that I got it. It stays put. But as far as a caterpillar rearing plant, I don't think it's probably the best.
Right.
And in terms of monarch butterflies, Saskatoon is on their northern range right now because the species has declined so drastically because they are a species at risk, and so we are at its northern range. And so when you do find one in your yard, it is when you think about it, you are providing habitat for that endangered species in your urban backyard, right? So it's a real exciting time when you find the caterpillar or you find a monarch, and so if you have it, at least there's an opportunity for when they arrive for them. So
for all we know, we're providing those kinds of resources for endangered bees or the other kinds of declining insects. So just by having these plants available. Question: is native different for different regions? I think this is a quick answer, right? Like, yes.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And it depends on even the size of your region. So there are things that are native to Saskatchewan that aren't native to Manitoba or Alberta, and then there are things that are only native to a certain area in Saskatchewan. The Cypress Hills is a really good example. They have a lot of plants that only occur there in Saskatchewan and not elsewhere. So something like the lodgepole pine. The only place you can find a lodgepole pine growing in the wild in Saskatchewan is Cypress Hills. Will it grow outside of there? Yes, it will, but you'd have to plant it.
So, we know that the plants that you grow through Blazing Star Rennie are local because you're growing them here and you've sourced seeds here. Where can people get your bedding plants? We know that you can order seeds by mail, but what about the plants themselves this year?
Yeah, so unfortunately with COVID, the last couple of years, we used to be at the Saskatoon Farmers Market, and last year with COVID, we weren't there. And this year, we're looking at probably getting back there in June. We haven't quite decided what's happening. We're just sort of watching to see what happens with the variants right now. But we're planning to do a couple of weekends, probably in June at the Saskatoon Farmers Market, and then also we're looking at maybe some options for ordering, and then booking on deliveries and maybe picking up as well. With the wildflowers, though, they are a lot slower to grow, and so it's not like your greenhouse variety of plants that are in full bloom at the greenhouse right now. So it's a little bit later in the season, more into June, when they're available for garden, or for to be available to the public. So if you're interested, watch our Facebook page and our website, and I think it's in the chat, and we'll be sending out notifications when we have plants available. So
perfect. Now, here's a question that none of you will want to answer. Someone's yard has come with some of the "don't grow these" from the wallet card. After 30 years, they have not managed to get rid of them. Suggestions for getting rid of creeping bellflower. If anyone doesn't know what that is that fabulously beautiful, invasive, blue thing, monster.
I can answer that. My next manuscript that I'm working on is Revenge on Your Weeds, a dish best served hot or cold. And apparently, they were brought over as an ornamental, but they were a major French cuisine in the 1700s. So eat your weeds, and then they won't come back. You can even eat the green parts too. However, you drop a little tiny piece of that root, it's coming back no matter what. That's all I have to say, but eat your weeds.
can you deep fry the roots, Sandra? Will that kill them?
Yes, like parsnips. They're really good, actually, roasted, and blend them with mashed potatoes. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah,
And
if you
go ahead, Chet.
Go ahead, Rennie.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, yeah, things like the oxeye daisies and and the bluebells. Yeah, or creeping bellflower. You're going to be constantly battling it, right? But you slowly pick away at it. You make sure, like with the bellflower, you don't drop any segment of root, and you just slowly pick away at it. And it's always going to be there, but you can maybe minimize the amount. And, you go out in the morning time, to go pick your wild strawberries that are growing in your wildflower patch. You also go and pick a couple of, the creeping bellflowers that are popping up too. Sort of make that part of your routine. Like in our wildflower patch in the front yard, we got quackgrass constantly moving in, and I just make it, a couple times, 3 times a week. I just go for a little walk through the little wildflower patch, and I just pull the quackgrass as best I can. Right, so you just sort of make that into your routine.
Do you ever use mulches? Have you ever used cardboard? Because some people do that, using kind of sheet mulch with cardboard and to kill the creeping bellflower, and then just create holes where the plants that you want to grow are.
Yeah. So when we started our wildflower patch in the front yard, that's what we did. We cut out the sod, and then we sort of worked up the soil underneath, dumped a little bit of zoo poo in from the Saskatoon Forestry Farm in, just to build a little bit of organic matter. And then we mulched it with wood mulch around the plants, because we planted individual plants. And then as that mulch broke down, the wildflower started reseeding itself, and we haven't had to add mulch since. And that's been almost 10 years. And, and then we just let the organic matter build up and the stems build up. And, we have a really thick patch of wildflowers in there. And like when I say we have quackgrass coming in, we lawn edge around it. With every week, we sort of go around to, poke between the lawn and the wildflower patch. And then any quackgrass that pops up, we just pull it out real quickly. So, it depends on how bad your weed infestation is when you start out. You may want to start with that. I have some friends that have used the cardboard mulch to start out too, and it seemed to work for them. I guess it depends on what your weed pressure is too, right? If you have no weed pressure, or you're starting from a blank slate, like what maybe Chet was starting with, you may not have to worry about that. So it really depends.
Someone is on 3.7 acres outside of Saskatoon. How and where would one start to make the transition to native species with so much space?
Yeah, lucky you. That's I know it's a bit of a double-edged sword because you've got all of that opportunity, but then it's potentially overwhelming. Um, uh, there again, I would start nearest to your house because that's where you're going to be spending a lot of time, and it's great for you to be able to enjoy that view of established wildflowers. It's also practical so that you don't have to go to the end of your almost 4-acre property every time you want to go work on your garden. That being said, and I don't know anything about the layout of your property, but you have the opportunity to establish some fairly large areas of some fairly vigorously spreading things like showy milkweed. I typically don't, unless you're an experienced gardener, I wouldn't recommend that for in a city yard because it can quickly take over a small space, but you have nothing but space on an acreage, so it's great out there. So that is one that I would suggest for out there. But just again, take it in manageable chunks. The last thing I want people to be is overwhelmed and kind of give up because it's become a lot of work. Just start small. Start with a few different plants based on your local conditions and work out from there. If you'd like to tackle it as a larger project, I'd recommend maybe partnering with a landscape designer that has experience with native plants. There are not very many, but I can point you to the literally 2 or 3 people that do have that experience. They're all in the Saskatoon region. So if you're not in the Saskatoon region, you might be out of luck. I can help you somewhat, but my time is limited.
And then too, when you're looking at a large area like 3 acres, you have to look at it from maybe like more of an ecosystem approach as well. So it wouldn't be just wildflowers you'd want to put in as well. You'd want to put native grasses in, maybe consider some trees and shrubs as well. So, do you want to create a little bit of an aspen stand and get some trembling aspen and some choke cherries and Saskatoons in and sort of create sort of that diversity of habitats in that site too. So, you're looking at almost like a little restoration project as well and creating those different micro habitats, if you want to call it that way. So
we have time. I'm sorry, Sandra, go ahead.
I would add buffalo berry to that as well. I really hate it when people plant sea buckthorn because it's not native, and buffalo berry or soapberry is basically the same plant and does the same thing for you. But again, you need the right conditions for that plant as well. So there's lots of berries and stuff out there that are native. Beaked hazelnuts might also be an option for that area.
So I think we have time for one more question from the chat, and then I have one more unfair question for you. So the question from the chat is it better to seed an area in the fall, or would you grow the seeds in as plugs and plant them in the spring? Does it work to just throw seed out there in the fall?
It does, and it depends on the size of area you want to do. If you're doing a really small area, maybe you can start the seeds indoors in root trainers. I've got a couple of root trainers on the go right now, and then plant them out in the spring. If you have a larger area, though, that adds up to a lot of root trainers, and that's fairly labor intensive because you have to keep them all watered and everything, and sometimes if you have a small area, that's fine. You can go all plugs. If you have a really large area like that acreage, maybe a lot of seed, and then for something the size of a city yard, you could do something in between, have a hybrid with some seed and some plugs. So it depends on the area and how many species you want to deal with, and your budget as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you look at seeds versus plugs, wildflower seeds are, they are expensive compared to your ornamental seeds, and but your plugs too are very, expensive as well, right? So like Chet said, your budget, what you're looking at for your budget. And but one way to look at too with these wildflowers or these native plant species, they do reseed themselves as well, right? So you don't necessarily need to blanket the entire area. All you need to do is get some established, and then they'll reseed themselves, or you can harvest the seed yourself and then plant it out in other areas too. So like that 3 acres plot, maybe start with a small area, and then you just take your seeds and replant them out in other parts of that area too. So,
and it depends on how patient a person you are. You can grow a crocus from seed, and you'll get a tiny leaf the size of a dime the first year, and you get 2 of those the second year, and then maybe the third year you'll get a bloom, or maybe the fourth year you get a bloom. Or you could go to Rennie, pay him $4, and he'll give you a plant that blooms next year.
Yes.
or the second year or the third year, depending.
Yeah. So it's all about how much patience you have. I've done it both ways. And yeah, it all just depends on what your goals are. But yes, if you plant things in the seed in the fall and just let nature take its course, that the snowpack and snow melt and the spring rains do their work, yes, you will get plants out of that seed that you put in the ground. You can do the same thing now. If you put seed in the ground now, it's not too late. We haven't gotten any rain, but hopefully that's coming. Or you could speed it along with a little bit of, hose nozzle rain, and those seeds will take. Yeah.
So Wild About Saskatoon, we're very enthusiastic about native plant gardening because it's a way of living in close contact with the plants that belong here and supporting in some crazy urban way aspects of the ecosystem that belongs here. It's a way of being at home in the place where we're living. And so we're creating a new project called Pollinator Paradise YXE. We're going to have beautiful signs, and you can see the design in the chat. And we'll have coming your way soon on our website, which is wildaboutsascatoon.org. You will find the qualifications, the way that what you would need to have in your garden to receive one of these beautiful signs, which doesn't yet exist, but will soon. So I wanted to let you know that that program is coming. I want to thank all of you for being part of this special conversation. I want to thank Rennie and Chet and Sandra very much. And I want to ask you each one unfair question. Of all the plants in your gardens, which is your one favorite?
Everybody all at once.
It was an unfair question. You know that if you could only take one to your desert island, what would it be?
I can't decide between Indian breadroot or wild onion.
Okay, I'm coming with you for sure.
Yeah, I mentioned at the beginning that I like the wild blue flax in the mornings. That's the one that I like. But my true passion is Plainsboro fescue, which is would have at one time was the dominant grass in the Saskatoon region. Has become a rare species actually, and I'm working on a little mini project to try and collect a bunch of fescue seed over the next few years and create some of that diversity of seed out there. And so I have a whole bunch of Plainsboro fescue that's started, and I'll be adding a few into my front yard this summer. So that's going to be my future one. So.
Yeah, it's like trying to pick a favorite child. Well, I only have one child, so that's easy child-wise. I actually find it much more difficult for native plants. My favorite native plant for gardening, one of them would probably be giant hyssop because it's easy to grow. You can grow it in shade, you can grow it in the sun. It'll take some dry soil, it'll take moist soil. You can eat it. If you come to visit my yard, my son will definitely feed you giant hyssop. He'll be ripping leaves off and shoving them in your face and going, "Here, eat this." It's fantastic. It tastes like black licorice, and it smells like black licorice, and it's a great pollinator plant. The thing is just vibrating with bees in the summertime. I can't fault it in any way. So that's got to be my favorite, I guess, for gardening.
Yeah, no, and Chet only has one child. I have 3 teenagers. 2 are named after plants. 1 isn't named after plants, but that doesn't mean one is not liked less than any of the others. So we love all 3 of them equally, even though one's not named after a plant.
So thank you all again for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that you all are now thinking of your own favorite native plant and your favorite place to go and visit it. Happy gardening, and thank you very much for being with us.